What's up, y'all? Indianapolis Regionals is coming up next week, so a lot of people have been practicing very hard at the Regulation G format. We haven't had an official event yet in that. It does start on May 1st, so really grassroots tournaments online have been the only way people have been getting reliable practice outside of Pokemon Showdown. So for that reason, attendance at grassroots tournaments were really high, really competitive this weekend, so I wanted to go over some of the results from that, some of the trends, and basically how it deviated or kind of played to the expectations people had before the weekend based on the previous smaller grassroots tournaments. So we're going to jump right in, but if you guys enjoy these videos, these analysis of the metagame, please subscribe to the channel. Planning to do a lot more in the future. And yeah, with all that being said, let's jump into it. So as a brief overview of what we covered last week, it seemed like weather was shaping up to be the, one of the dominant forces in the metagame. Pelipper, Kyogre, Tornadus with Rain Dance or Sunny Day, Koraidon, all were really taking a big portion of the top cut teams. Mainly the, the Tornadus Rain, but Pelipper and Kyogre are starting to pick up, as well as Calyrex-Ice with Trick Room. We saw it a lot with Pelipper as well, just a lot of synergy there. And then Raging Bolt is something I singled out as being particularly strong against the Pelipper, Tornadus, Koraidon, Kyogre, a little weak to Calyrex-Ice, but generally a very strong balanced pickup for a lot of players. And looking forward, I think for the most part, we got a lot of that right. I'll go into further detail while we're looking at the tournaments in depth, but for the updated watch list for Indianapolis Regionals, I want to highlight Calyrex-Ice once again, particularly with Pelipper. The synergy between those guys proved to be really effective this weekend, taking one tournament as well as a bunch of top cut slots overall. Raging Bolt, I think, came out to be one of the premier glue Pokemon for a lot of teams with Assault Vest with Snarl or Electroweb, enabling them to function a lot better, kind of chip down Focus Ashes and just weaken otherwise strong centerpiece restricteds. Tornadus, I think, is going to continue being strong, particularly with Gholdengo and Terapagos Terrastellar. We've seen, it's always going to be Terrastellar, isn't it? But Tornadus, Gholdengo seem to be a really common combination with the Terapagos, whether it be the Calm Mind or the Spec set. Gholdengo seemed to be a very effective Pokemon. One of its biggest weaknesses in the metagame is Calyrex Shadow, and Terapagos just is able to wall the Astral Barrages, so tons of synergy there. Excited to see that taking up a large percentage of teams, and we weren't seeing a lot of Gholdengo last week, so I think it makes a lot of sense as well. So hopping over to the first major tournament this week, we had the Victory Road Spring Challenge. Basically 260 players all had to enter with $10, so they're all putting a little bit on the line. So generally going to be expecting to see a little bit more serious teams from these type of tournaments where you do have to pay an entry fee, as well as just more incentive because the entry fee contributes to the prize. So more prize, more money, people are going to try their best a bit more. So going into the teams, we saw really a lot of Calyrex-Ice Rain ultimately winning the tournament. Basically, it got first place, 1/16th, and then 2 in the top 32. But the differentiator, we were seeing a lot of Farigiraf as the last Pokemon, but this one actually had Gholdengo. And looking at the details of the team, we see a Terra Grass Calyrex-Ice, which isn't so common, just trying to beat Amoonguss a little bit better while sacrificing a weakness to the Fire. Both types weak to Fire, but generally with Rain on the field, that's not that big of a concern. And Gholdengo here is a Metal Coat set, trying to deal maximum damage with Nasty Plot Make It Rains. And we did see some normal Gholdengos rise to prominence this weekend, but this one just going for the generally stronger Terra Fairy defensive type, because you have Wide Guard on the team to not be that worried about not being immune to Ghost type Astral Barrage. So definitely a lot of synergy on this team. I think Calyrex-Ice Pelipper was the team that I was looking forward to most this weekend, just seeing how it shook out across both of these larger tournaments. And ultimately taking a first place spot in this one wasn't too big of a surprise, but I think it's definitely one of, if not the archetype to be building against for the next tournament. It seemed like people weren't that prepared, maybe expected their counters to the Calyrex-Ice to be a little more efficient than they actually were. Maybe Amoonguss just sporing a lot of them because they were Terra Water, but I do think people are going to have to build a little more creatively to beat this Terra Grass one instead of just slapping an Amoonguss on their team. Zooming out a bit, we will go into the top cut teams in detail, really the top 8 teams, but I do want to focus on basically the prominence of weather in this top cut as well as Trick Room. So last week I pointed out that weather and Trick Room were dominating these top cuts in general, and that has continued to be a trend here. Out of 23 teams that made it to the second day of competition, 14 had a weather element, and 4 of those converted into top 8, which isn't like a astounding conversion rate within the cut, but it is definitely notable that this many teams in cut have weather. So the teams that don't have it need to have really strong answers, and the teams that do have to be conscious that they're going to be fighting against teams with their same weather, or you're going to be fighting against teams that are trying to combat your weather. So just something to be on the eye out for Indianapolis. So in the same vein, I want to look at Trick Room because it is another field effect that people tend to build their teams around, definitely different tempos between them, but Trick Room made 11 of the 23 day 2 slots, and then converted to 4 out of 8 of the top 8. So I guess technically a little bit positive of a conversion rate, because 11 out of 23 is a little less than 50%, and 50% of top 8 was Trick Room, but pretty much similar to the weather conversion rates. But I do want to highlight that, yeah, basically, I think that having the option to not play the Tailwind Mirror or the Speed Mirror, essentially just going full bulk, full slowness on all your Pokemon, and especially your restricted Pokemon, means you can invest a lot more into bulk, play more proactively with your strategy instead of playing on your opponent's tempo with Tailwind, which I think is really smart and is kind of an explanation why these teams are doing so well and ultimately winning this tournament. And spoiler alert, we do also have a Trick Room team, or a team with the Trick Room component, winning the next tournament as well. Chi-Yu, I think, is also interesting. We haven't seen a lot of that in the previous grassroots tournaments, but it's taking up 2 out of the 4 top 4 slots here, making it to finals on kind of a more balanced team. Balance being relative to like hard Tailwind, hyper-offensive teams like this team in 3rd place is. Chi-Yu has a lot of interesting tools this metagame. Essentially, you have it to go for Snarl against top special restricted Pokemon like Calyrex-Shadow. It's definitely really strong against that, as well as against Terapagos. If they're not Covert Cloak or Clear Amulet, the Snarl will just lower them and lower their special attack and break their Terra Shell, which is just a really valuable combination. That's why we're seeing a lot more Snarl in this metagame in general, but Chi-Yu is actually dealing meaningful damage with it, so I like that a lot. And it's also pretty decent against Calyrex. It ultimately lost to Calyrex in the finals, but had to beat a lot to get there, I imagine. But I think Chi-Yu resisting the Icicle Crash or the Glacial Lance and having a Follow Me Pokemon next to it means you can freely go for Dark Pulse or Overheat to knock out the Calyrex. So I think if you can burn a Terra early, preserve your Follow Me plus Chi-Yu, you can handle the Calyrex-Ice as long as it doesn't have like a crazy amount of boosts to knock you out through Friend Guard and a Resist. The next Pokemon I want to highlight is actually Ursaluna Blood Moon. There wasn't a lot of Ursaluna Blood Moon in the cut, so to see it get all the way to top 4 is pretty impressive to me. It's on a composition that's very similar to, I believe oftentimes this would be a Chi-Yu if it wasn't an Incineroar, and then a Wellspring Ogerpon in place of the Miraidon. So interesting that this team is still finding success. Really kind of speaks to the power of the Blood Moon Ursaluna, in my opinion. And if you look at these teams outside of the Gholdengo, on a bunch of them, there's really nothing. I mean, there's a King Gambit here. There's a couple Steel types in the metagame, but all of them don't love sitting in front of an Earth Power from a Life Orb Ursaluna. So I feel like Blood Moon Ursaluna is in a pretty good spot this metagame, especially with Calyrex-Shadow being unable to hit it with Astral Barrage, unable to hit either Furgraph or the Blood Moon Ursaluna, forcing it to go for single target Psychics or like Expanding Force or something like that. But yeah, interesting to see it doing that well. Looking forward to how it does in the future. Last up is the Miraidon, which definitely had a lot of people sleeping on it. This is Tayo. He won a European regional with Articuno Ninetales, the first regional ever won by Articuno to my knowledge, but definitely a very innovative team builder. But throwing the gauntlet down, saying Miraidon is trash, might be the biggest fraud in Regulation G. Combined participants across these 3 tournaments, the 3 previously largest grassroots tournaments, I believe, and only one was able to reach the top cut. He tweeted this, I believe, last night, before the results for this tournament were posted, before any of the teams were public, and then it ended up making 4th place in this tournament as well as 13th place, 2 wins away from winning one of the largest prize tournaments yet. Is pretty impressive, pretty big turnaround. So definitely seeing some innovation for Miraidon that's been able to take it out of that 1 out of 668 top cut percentage from before. Going a bit more into the teams now, we have Davide Carre's 2nd place team. So this team is pretty interesting. It's definitely focused around the Calyrex-Shadow, but usually we see a boosting item, the spell tag, or a focus sash on the Calyrex to set up with. Oftentimes Terraghost, but Terra Fairy is definitely not unheard of to go for a nasty plot and then heal up any damage you've taken with a Terra Fairy Draining Kiss at +2, dealing a lot of damage if not KOing some Pokemon. So going for a bit of a bulkier spin, it looks like, or at least having Citrus Berry. So with Friend Guard, that bulk can be really, really impressive. You have Beads of Ruin on the Chi-Yu to allow your Draining Kisses or Astral Barrages at +2 to do even more damage. I think Terra Fairy is definitely the way to go in the future for the Calyrex-Shadow. I think the Terra Ghost or Terra Psychic sets are a little too susceptible to Snarl counterplay, Ting-Lu, things like that. So having the option to hit things and heal back up to really sustain your Calyrex, to not be as flimsy as the Focus Sash or Life Orb or even Specs ones can be, is a really smart pick overall. I want to point out the Mienshao as well. The combination of Feint, Fake Out, Close Combat, and Wide Guard is really the perfect Calyrex-Shadow partner. Close Combat within their focus is basically able to threaten a KO on an Incineroar. If you realize you can't take the KO, it's like Bold Max or something, you can Terra Fire fighting the next game to knock it out. Feint is able to pierce through Wide Guard and let your Astral Barrages hit targets around that. Fake Out is just generally good for getting a setup on a nasty plot. Fake out the Pokemon that's threatening you. And then Wide Guard is really solid in the Calyrex mirror. It forces them to maybe go for a Psychic into the Mienshao twice, or hit it, double tap it with the partner as well. But that is a turn that they are not going for an Astral Barrage and can potentially prevent you from having to go for a Terra yourself. So I think this is a really strong team, really one of the few balanced teams that didn't have a speed control element that was able to do well. So I think there's a lot of merit here, and I'm interested in testing it out myself at some point. Next up is Oliver Eskelin. He's really well known for being really an excellent player with Tailwind teams, and this is no exception. We've seen a lot of Calm Mind Terapagos on Tailwind teams, but Oliver decided to take things in a little bit of a different direction. We still have the Tornadus, Rillaboom, Incineroar, Urshifu plus Rain combination that we've seen on a lot of these Tailwind protect the restricted teams, but what's different here is we actually have a Specs Terapagos just going for Stellar Terra, Starstorm, unresisted coverage, along with Chi-Yu to lower defensive stats, basically being able to 2-hit KO everything with that Choice Specs Starstorm. However, instead of like coverage like Earth Power, if you're going to be going for Stellar Terra every time, you might as well just have like a very specific attack option. And here the attack option is Sleep Talk. You can actually use this Terapagos as a Spore switch in, which is kind of an issue for Chi-Yu if they go for a cheeky defensive Terra. Again, Tornadus if they go for something cheeky like a defensive Terra, that's kind of an issue. But if you switch it onto the Spore, you can just go for Sleep Talk for the first turn and get that Stellar Terra, and then I guess you're kind of rolling for actually longer sleep turns, which is an outlier. The only time I've ever seen Sleep Talk be effective is on like Choice Spec Sylveon with Hyper Voice back in the day, so back in like 2015 era. So this is interesting adaptation. And just overall a pretty aggressive team. The Chi-Yu Focus Sash, again with the Snarl trying to handle Follow Me plus the Calyrex Shadow Rider. So you can go for Terra Ghost if you're trying to fake out Cycle on you and Snarl it, if they are the Terra Ghost one or a Terra Psychic one, and that can prove to be really, really effective. Next up, we will go into the Farigiraf Miraidon team. The Miraidon is actually Choice Specs on this team with Terra Fairy Dazzling Gleam, which can be effective against things like Koraidon, just forcing that to go for a defensive Terra if you want to. Just even having it, you don't even have to go for the Terra to knock it out, I'd imagine, with the Choice Specs and the Hadron Engine damage output. But yeah, Choice Specs Electro Drift knocking out pretty much everything at neutral. Draco Meteor getting pretty close, but not as strong as Electro Drift in the electric terrain. I really like the Volt Switch on this Miraidon just because Rillaboom is the #1 counterplay to Miraidon in the game right now. So people will lead they'll lead the Rillaboom, and then you can't lead the Miraidon because the Grassy Surge will activate after your Hadron Engine, and that's just like super annoying because you're instantly a lot weaker. Your damage output is weakened, so you can actually lead the Miraidon. If they don't lead the Rillaboom, you can Volt Switch out as they switch it in, get it in later, or just have it in the back and then kind of repeat that cycle over and over, slowly chipping things down with Volt Switch while they try and position around you, or just going for Draco Meteors and doing a ton of damage and then switching out naturally. Outside of that, the thing that interests me most about this team is probably the Icy Wind Flutter plus the Miraidon combo. Basically similar to having a Choice Specs Chi-Yu, except now we have an even stronger special attacker arguably in the Miraidon, but maybe a little bit less consistent damage. Again, the Rillaboom being able to switch in is still kind of annoying. But the other thing that's interesting to me is the foul play on the Farigiraf. So really solid against things like Calyrex that have a couple boosts up. You can foul play that, Terra Water to get around the Glacial Lance neutral on the Ice-type moves. So you can do a ton of damage that way, and it could serve as like a pseudo Trick Room counter. I think the Calyrex underspeeds Ursaluna Blood Moon naturally at 0, or they might speed tie. I'm not exactly sure on that, but having the foul play as an option to deal a big chunk of damage to Calyrex makes a ton of sense to me. And it's not really too surprising. I think Ursaluna Blood Moon plus Farigiraf are doing so well, or at least did well in this tournament, given the lack of resistances to normal in the metagame right now. I want to go into Stefan Mott's team with the Kyogre Tsareena, just because I feel like that's kind of a cheesier strategy, or at least a strategy that I was counting out as cheesy, but it's clear he was able to build out a really strong physical attacking team that also used the Tsareena, so I want to see what he has cooking here. So continuing in the trend of just Rain teams trying to respect Amoonguss and Rillaboom as much as they can, instead of the Terra Water on the Urshifu and the Kyogre, they're actually Terra Grass, which makes sense. And this is the standard Tsareena set I'm used to seeing. The wide lens to maximize the accuracy of Power Whip and Triple Axle, definitely great for consistency and reaching a top 8 tournament in such a size. You really can't afford to be missing too many attacks, so also Helping Hand to boost up the damage output of your Chien-Pao, your Kingambit, your Urshifu, just really pushing things over the top on your damage rolls, as well as the Water Spout on Kyogre if you have Tailwind up. And then Taunt, I think, is really important for not having to play around with an Amoonguss's Terra Water Terra choice. You could knock it out with Water Spout plus Triple Axle, but if they Terra to Terra Water or something, you have to make the read and go for Power Whip. But you can completely circumvent that with Taunt. This is also good against Trick Room teams. If they have an Amoonguss plus a Calyrex, you can Taunt through the Rage Powder, which can be effective. So I do think this is a very smart Tsareena, definitely the one that I would expect to be most common in the future. And then King Gambit, respecting once again Amoonguss very, very highly. Interesting that there's 2 dark types here. Just trying to be as prepared for things like Calyrex Shadow. I think Calyrex Shadow doesn't have a great King Gambit matchup, especially if they don't have really it's only the Urshifu on that team, on those teams that do especially well against it. So I do think King Gambit was a great call here from Stefan. So I have these standings linked in the description just because I can't go over every team, but I do want to go over some of the more interesting ones, the ones that kind of pique my interest just looking at them off the page. And the first one is going to be this 13th place Miraidon team. We have a Suicune with Snarl, basically, again, Terra Dark, Snarl, that's just your Calyrex Shadow counter if they are not a Terra Fairy one. So the fact people are even running sets like this is, I think, an indication that the Calyrex Shadow Rider probably need to be moving to Terra Fairy. But beyond that, outside of that, it's pretty standard. Landorus Incarnate hasn't been doing that well, but I could, it kind of makes sense on a more defensive Tailwind team like this. And then Miraidon is kind of I'm honestly surprised it was able to do this well. But again, we are seeing Volt Switch is a very important move to have on this Pokemon, just to be able to pivot out against Rillaboom. This team does punish Rillaboom pretty hard, can't do a lot against Amoonguss, Ogerpon. Heart Flame obviously crushes it, Incineroar intimidates it, and then Sludge Bomb plus Earth Power usually does super effective to Rillaboom's base typing and its Terastallization typing, and Substitute if it's coming on the field to fake out you is also really effective. So I think this is a pretty well built team, a bit more creative, bulky solution to deal with Rillaboom. But I think definitely a very consistent one based on it reaching that far of a stage in the tournament. Next team I want to cover is actually this top 16 team with Koraidon and Bronzong. I want to cover this one just because a lot of people's complaints with Koraidon and Kyogre to an extent, but Kyogre has Water Spout, is that Precipice Blades, Kyogre's best attack, is 85% accurate to hit both targets. So that's not really consistent enough to base your whole entire team about. So this team actually has Gravity, Trick Room, Bronzong with Hypnosis. So you can set up Gravity. This is a very common strategy in 2016. I think it might not have been as popular in 2019, but yeah, Bronzong able to set up Gravity for your Precipice Blades to become 100% accurate, which lets you Swords Dance and really take full advantage of that. It also grounds any flying type, so don't have to worry about those immunities anymore. And then the Hypnosis really just lets you go for Swords Dances really consistently. Just get your Trick Room up. If your Bronzong survives like 2 turns, you're really starting to deal a lot of damage to your opponent. So a common game plan could easily be something like Incineroar or Raging Bolt plus Bronzong, Parting Shot or Volt Switch out, get your Trick Room up, and then start going for Gravity, Precipice Blades, Hypnosis. So yeah, really strong team, kind of a return to a 2016 style of team here. The last team I want to focus on is actually this Koraidon team, which is unlike anything I've seen thus far. So there is the Koraidon with the Orichalcum Pulse and the Choice Band Terra Fire. So this is really interesting. You are opting away from the Clear Amulet, which is obviously more consistent against Intimidate, but if you're just going to knock out the Incineroar in one shot with the Banded Collision Course anyways, it doesn't really matter, and the Choice Band otherwise gives you a lot better damage output. So we've seen a lot of Koraidon opt for just a Fire move and a Fighting move, and then like Bulk Up or Swords Dance or something like that, but this one has both Outrage and U-Turn, so hitting some of the things that would otherwise kind of want to switch in on Koraidon. Basically Dragon types, Dragon Flying types could do really any flying type that would resist the Flare Blitz as well was really effective. Outrage pretty much hits all of them. They're mostly just Dragon types really. And U-Turn otherwise just really strong. People try and switch in Intimidate, go for U-Turn, deal with them that way, or lead Porygon 2 plus Koraidon. U-Turn Trick Room into your sweepers. There's also an Entei with Inner Focus Eruption. Really hard to deal with that because of Inner Focus, so really interesting team, as well as a Taunt Thunderwave Fluttermane, Ogerpon with Grassy Glide, and Ivy Cudgel with Terra Rock. Such a crazy team. Porygon 2, no recover. Really insane stuff. Yeah, probably the craziest team in this cut, but I think that's a good note to end on before we go into the next tournament, the VGC Trainer School. So as it says here, this was a $400 prize pool tournament held by the VGC Trainer School. It ended up having 358 players because it was free entry. I think there was more recognizable names in the previous tournament, but there's definitely really incredible players in this one as well, like Michael Derbesti, the world's finalist from this year, JoeUX9, really strong player, Scarlet Skill, I believe, a regional champion. David Ness, a strong Latin American player as well. So just overall really strong players in this cut towards the top. 13 out of 23 of the top cut teams had weather. I think 14 if you include Torkoal, but I kind of put Torkoal in a weird category where it's more of a just solo sweeper than it is a sun Pokemon for the most part. But if you count Torkoal, 14 out of 23 and 5 out of 8 got to the top cut. So really good conversion rate on weather teams this tournament, ultimately won by a Koraidon. And Trick Room teams, Michael also has Farigiraf in this team, so technically Trick Room element there. But overall, Trick Room did a little worse in this tournament. 6 out of 23 of the cut teams were Trick Room or had a Trick Room element, and 2 out of 8 went to the top 8. So yeah, overall not the best tournament for Trick Room, but kind of counter to the previous... I guess Weather plus Trick Room won both tournaments with Calyrex Pelipper in one instance, and then Koraidon Farigiraf in this instance, so kind of a weird parallel. We also saw in general Calyrex Shadow Rider doing this tournament, whereas Calyrex-Ice did better in the other one. Going into Michael's team, like I mentioned, this is the Clear Amulet one, Terra Fire with Flare Blitz and Flame Charge. He was running Swords Dance Flame Charge before, but I think realized the immediate damage output, the burst damage of Terra Fire Flare Blitz can be definitely very much appreciated when you don't have time to just like build up that damage with Flame Charge and Swords Dance, so like that a lot. We also have a very targeted Terra type on the Amoonguss, a Terra Dark to handle things like Calyrex's Psychic and Ghost type coverage. That's really effective for that, as well as Sludge Bomb to handle the Rillabooms and all the grass types in the metagame. Walking Wake is interesting. It was a choice specs on the previous tournaments that Michael was playing in. This one is a Life Orb Terra Water, so dealing insane damage with Sun Boosted Hydro Steam, as well as Draco Meteor and Flamethrower. That's a really difficult Pokemon to handle. I'm not sure if it's special attack boosting or speed boosting. It was a choice spec Snarl one in the past, so I kind of assumed it was speed then, but all bets are off at this point. You also have a choice spec Fluttermane with Icy Wind. Again, could be speed, could be special attack to take advantage of Icy Wind a bit better. I'd imagine it's speed, so you can go for a boosted Icy Wind plus a Terra Fire Flame Charge on lead with your Koraidon. That would be my guess, but again, no stream matches to base that on. The Farigiraf mainly there to serve as a Trick Room Pokemon, as well as just to reverse Trick Room against other Trick Room teams, as well as block priority for the otherwise frail Fluttermane and potentially Walking Wake as well. So the next team I would like to go over is the Calyrex Shadow team that got second place. Joyux9 got this finish with it. Basically, this is very similar to the team that Wolf was able to get the win with at the Honolulu Challenge that a lot of people have been iterating on. 5 out of 6 of the Pokemon are very, very similar, I think even to the Terra type, except for the Urshifu being a Mystic Water set instead of Choice Scarf. A little more balanced of a set, maybe a bit more bulk to handle. Basically, if you get into a bad position, you might be able to live an attack, go for a Protect instead of just being stuck on the field, and a Raging Bolt instead of Tornadus, so going a lot more balanced of an approach. So the focus of this team is less so to get the speed advantage so much as it is to set up the Calyrex or the Raging Bolt and just kind of outbulk and position your opponent, which Joe is definitely very adept as a player at, so no surprise he was able to take it this deep. I think he actually won a smaller grassroots tournament, maybe the night or a couple nights before, so definitely something he's really practiced. Scarlet Skill also did get a top 16 with this team, so definitely the prevalent, more balanced take on Calyrex Shadow right now. Next we have a Terapagos team with the Gholdengo, which I kind of alluded to in the intro, but yeah, this is a choice specs Gholdengo. A lot of teams that expect the Calm Mind Terapagos to be very passive early on, you can unexpectedly just bring the Gholdengo in and go for a Make It Rain and Tailwind, go for knockouts. I also want to highlight Trick on this set in particular as being a really effective answer in the Terapagos mirror, because a lot of that mirror is just trying to set up as many Calm Minds as possible and try not to get crit out by the other Terapagos. But if you can trick the other Terapagos, yes, their initial damage output is going to be really impressive, but if you have a couple Calm Minds up already, you are just going to win that war automatically by either PP stall or just beating them 1v1. I'll hold off on going into detail on a lot of these teams just because they're very similar to the previous tournament teams, but I will go over some of the highlights, just some of the broader trends I've been seeing. I've been seeing a lot of Substitute Zacian plus Howl Gouging Fire just to take advantage of the bulk and utility of Substitute while also getting the boost that you would otherwise want from Swords Dance. I think this is really smart. I've seen it paired with Ting Lu plus Dondozo a fair bit, going for Yawn Sand Tomb stuff early game and then sweeping with a Howl potentially Zacian plus Chen Power or something like that in the back. Been seeing a bit more of the Zamazenta plus Pelipper, the Rain Dog, been seeing a ton of that. Didn't end up at the top of either tournaments, but still definitely very potent, something to be on the lookout for. Very offensive Trick Room team with the Choice Specs Torkoal or maybe it was Helping Hand on this team, I'm not sure. But again, yeah, Ice Rider, Calyrex plus Torkoal, probably the most offensive stuff you'll see in Trick Room. And then here we have a Smeargle plus Calyrex team on what otherwise looks like a standard team. I want to go into the details of that. The moveset is Fake Out, Spore, Wide Guard, Follow Me. I could have definitely seen Feint sneaking its way on here, but just a general utility. Spore, if you get the speed advantage in Tailwind, is kind of insane. Fake Out to set up a nasty plot. Follow Me to protect from single target, and Wide Guard to protect against other Calyrex. Definitely very effective, and it makes sense on a team like this without a Focus Sash Calyrex. It is the spell tag, so you really can't afford to be taking any Astral Barrages without wasting your Terra. So having a Wide Guard to de-necessitate that definitely makes a ton of sense. This next team is literally the most anti-Calyrex Shadow team in the tournament. Outside of the Rillaboom, I think everything has an option for it. I guess just the Rillaboom and the Gastrodon, which are kind of just the Urshifu, which is the other offensive Pokemon on the Calyrex teams typically. So yeah, we have a Assault Vest, Fiery Wrath, Galarian Moltres, of course, Throat Chop, Sucker Punch, Chien-Pao, so whether they have Psychic Terrain or not, you're going to be able to hit them. And then Wide Guard Zamazenta and Wide Guard Pelipper. Really crazy, opting away from Iron Defense just for the utility of Wide Guard. Definitely very, very anti Calyrex Shadow, and we'll actually see if they were able to lose to one in the tournament. No, their loss ultimately was to a Koraidon. Let me see, did they ever lose? They actually lost to Joe's Calyrex Shadow. That's kind of funny. I would have loved to see how that match played out. I'm sure Joe had to do a lot of squirming to get around both the Gastrodon and all the dark types and Wide Guard trying to get around the Calyrex Shadow, but really interesting stuff there. Aside from that, a lot of the teams are pretty standard, and some of the ones that are a little bit weirder didn't do that well. So I want to look at the metagame tab just to look at the win-loss of some Pokemon and highlight that Cornerstone Ogerpon and Dondozo did like disproportionately really well, and Cornerstone Ogerpon typically used on Trick Room teams, but on Vovamax Ben 10's team, actually just on a more balanced team, which is interesting. Having Sturdy Follow Me is just generally great utility. Need to hit it twice to be able to knock it out, which gives an opening for things like Zamazenta to set up Body Press or Calyrex-Ice to set up Trick Room. The other mon I want to focus on is Dondozo. So this mon has a very high win percentage, and I think it would be even higher if a lot of the people that entered with it didn't just like start losing immediately and drop. We see someone was starting 2-0, a lot of negative performances, but outside of that, did really, really well on the Tinglu Dondozo compositions and a couple with the Tatsugiri Dondozo, but it really was the Tinglu Dondozo that was doing especially well. So definitely start looking for some more consistent options against that, to where it doesn't just like put you in the meat grinder of Sandtomb plus Yawn and then chip you down for really annoying back Pokemon to sweep you at the end of the game. So once again, congrats to Michael on this win. I want to go back again just for predictions for Indianapolis generally. I feel like Calyrex-Ice Pelipper is really the thing to be watching right now as a restricted pair. I think Tornadus, Gholdengo, Terapagos is a combination that popped up this weekend that's really effective on Tailwind, and probably the best way to be using Terapagos if you don't want to be extremely passive right now. And then Raging Bolt and Amoonguss in general are both really slippery Pokemon to beat right now. I'm just going Raging Bolt because I only have 6 on the team builder, but Raging Bolt with Snarl, Electroweb just serves balanced teams, or just teams trying to deal with things like Terapagos or Calyrex Shadow that want to set up in front of you. The bulk and longevity of Raging Bolt really slows those type of Pokemon down. I also want to shout out Amoonguss just because it is my favorite Pokemon. I feel like Amoonguss right now is very slippery to beat, just because you can go for many different Terra types to cover different matchups. And so you might think you have a good Amoonguss matchup in theory, but a creative team builder might just have the correct Terra to beat you to cover a hole in their team that you would otherwise just blow right through. I think Calyrex-Ice Pelipper probably the archetype with the biggest target on its back, just because a lot of people with experience using Rain in the past can kind of just like draw on that past experience and use it to a high degree of success. And I think Calyrex Shadow as well, definitely something to be focusing on, but I think maybe a little less than the start of the format where it was the only thing you had to be focusing on. Hope you all enjoy these analysis videos. Let me know in the comments below which restricted Pokemon you think is going to end up taking Indianapolis, the first regional of the Regulation G format. And if you enjoy these videos, please subscribe to the channel. And with all that being said, peace y'all.